Over the last while, I've been living with some VA-based gaming monitors, and I quickly came to the conclusion, which is my opinion of course, that VA monitors, despite many strengths, kinda suck for gaming. Now, if you want a very condensed reason why I think that, here is some motion being displayed on an IPS gaming monitor, whereas here is some motion being displayed on a VA-based gaming monitor. Ugh, look at that smearing. Now, as is always the case with life, it's not quite as straightforward, as VA panels give you cholera and IPS panels give you belly rubs. So we're gonna have a closer look at gaming on VA panels in this video to see how we feel about it by the end of it. But before we get into that, it's time for a word from today's video sponsor that helped buy some monitors for the video. In a world dominated by garbage trash fans, one fan rises to the top with uncompromised build quality and a dedication to performance. The Be Quiet Silent Wing 4s lay waste to the competition. No unicorn vomit gimmicks, just silent performance and dependable reliability. The Be Quiet Silent Wing 4s. Now, my first experience with a VA panel was earlier this year with a Samsung G302, and I was really excited to try it out, because VA solves one of the biggest shortcomings of IPS displays: contrast ratio. IPS displays really struggle to display deep black levels, and VA is much better at it. Although my excitement evaporated quickly for the G302 because the motion rendering was very blurry, which in a game like Escape from Tarkov, which I was playing a lot back then, it makes it really difficult to spot enemy players far off in the distance, because every time you move, everything just kind of blurs together. It didn't look very good. So I sent it back quite quickly and replaced it with a 24-inch LG IPS display, which despite having very similar response time and refresh rate specs, had motion rendering that didn't feel like it was rubbing Vaseline into my eyes every time I touched my mouse. And this was my first disappointing experience with VA. You can have black levels deeper than the Mariana Trench, but if the monitor has built-in heavy motion blur, it's not going to be a good gaming display. Now, my second experience with a VA panel was by far the longest and most disappointing, and it was with this Cooler Master GM34 Cqargb. What a beautiful name. Now, don't get me wrong, this monitor has a beautiful image. It's bright, contrasty, the colors pop and are really amazing, but that's with static images. The moment that there's movement, things all fall apart really badly. It has a pretty serious black smearing problem with movement. That picture that I showed you in the beginning of the video of the smeary asteroid, yes, that one, that was from this display. The smearing problem is so bad on this monitor that in the video where I first looked at it, I was convinced the panel was damaged in shipping. But a lot of people commented on that video saying, nah, that's just what VA looks like. Now, in the display's menus, there are a lot of settings to help combat this, things like overdrive and clarity settings, but that smeary asteroid picture was with the best settings I could find for the monitor in terms of motion rendering. Having said that, it is better in some games than others. Battlefield 5, for example, doesn't have an immediately obvious smearing problem, at least depending on the map. So despite having very impressive response time and refresh rate specs, this monitor has a really bad motion artifact, which after spending a month using this monitor as my primary gaming display, I just couldn't get used to it. It's so distracting. So I decided to go out and buy a comparable IPS alternative to this VA ultrawide so that they can battle it out. It's a surprisingly light, big monitor. Now, for this video, I went out and bought this GN850 by LG because aside from two characteristics, it being an IPS as opposed to a VA, and it having a slightly less aggressive curve to it, specs-wise, this monitor is remarkably similar to that Cooler Master VA panel I've been using. It's even got a nano IPS panel compared to the Quantum.VA on the other monitor, so it's like gimmick IPS versus gimmick VA. and first impressions were very positive. Yeah, the motion is so much better than it is on the VA panel. Like, it is a remarkable difference between the two, actually. But remember earlier in the video I said Battlefield 5 wasn't nearly the worst offender when it came to the smearing on the VA panel. So let's get to some other comparisons. First, I tried out some high contrast CSGO with the IPS display in its stock configuration compared to the VA panel in the best motion settings. Now this is by no means a perfect test, but it does help to illustrate the difference. The VA panel has a lot more overshoot and the edges of the gun is quite a bit more blurry. And despite being set to the same refresh rate and having similar response times, to my eye in person, the VA looked a lot blurrier. I then moved over to No Man's Sky, where initially, subjectively, I didn't notice much of a difference between the two displays, which I found really weird considering that I noticed really bad smearing while using the VA panel at home. So I got into my ship, flew around a bit, and eventually found some smearing on the VA. And the inconsistency of the smearing intensity in No Man's Sky made me realize something, which I quickly confirmed playing around in Photoshop. The extent to the black smearing on this Cooler Master VA panel varies massively depending on the color palette of the scene, which is why some games smear more than others on this display, and considering the worst offending color palette, it's real bad news for people who like to use dark mode browsing. Even just scrolling through a dark mode YouTube feed on this Cooler Master VA looks pretty rough, which shows it's not only a problem for gaming. But don't get me wrong, even motion that is in a color palette that doesn't offend this monitor is still pretty bad looking, but at least it doesn't have that deep black smearing in it. But is that the case for all VA monitors? Are they all good? Unless you like movement and gray. Well, to find out, I guess I've got to go buy another monitor. Now I also bought this LG 32GK60 for a couple of reasons. First off, I wanted a display that price-wise landed between the Cooler Master and the Samsung display that I tried a while ago. Also, it is one of the few VA panels that I've seen around at the moment that isn't curved. That seems to be quite rare for some reason. So let's plug in this LG VA monitor and see if it's any better. Now my first impression is actually that I really like this screen size. 32 inch is awesome, although this one's 1440p, which, you know, the pixel density is not great, but at 4K this would be amazing. Anyway, that's not really why we're here, so let's get into some of the games that we used earlier for motion rendering tests. Oh! Another player! That's very rare. Anyway, aside from that, even not in a scene where the monitor is offended by grays, the motion rendering's really bad on these displays. Bye, player. And after that excitement, I launched my spaceship and very quickly realized that the smearing was definitely a problem on this monitor as well. Oh, it's so bad. And with this shot that looks like it's from footage of a Bigfoot sighting, there's the smearing clear as day. Having said that, the smearing on this LG VA isn't quite as bad as the smearing on that Cooler Master VA, but honestly, it still looks pretty terrible. So at the end of the day, both IPS and VA each have one main shortcoming. IPS doesn't have particularly good contrast ratio, whereas VA has pretty terrible motion rendering. One of those is a bit of a shame, the other is a complete deal breaker, at least to me. Now, I am quite sensitive to this kind of thing, so maybe it's not going to be as big a deal for you. Let me know in the comment section down below if you have a VA panel that you use for gaming where you don't really mind about the smearing or haven't noticed. Also, I have seen some hardware unboxed reviews of some high-end new Samsung VA panels which apparently mostly solve the problem. However, I haven't had any first-hand experience with either of those monitors, so I can't really comment on that. Which neatly brings me to the closing thoughts on this video. Something may seem very promising on paper, but it doesn't mean that it won't attack your eyes with dessert forks the moment you get it behind closed doors. Anyway, until the next video, thank you for watching, bye bye.